welcome back to Thompson & Hine's Coffee Chat series. My name is Cassandra Borchers. For those of you that don't know me, I'm a partner in Thompson & Hine's Investment Management Practice Group and also chair of our Blockchain and Cryptocurrencies Group. Today, we are wrapping our three-part series on becoming a registered fund board member. Previously, we've discussed the roles and responsibilities that come along with being a member of such a board and how to design your strategic plan for getting on a board. Today, the third and final phase of our discussion will focus on how to secure a seat at the table through the interview process. And I have the privilege of being joined today by an exceptional and experienced panel, including Dina Tantra, who is an independent board director and chair for Heartland Funds, chair of nominating and governance committees for both Walden Trust Funds and Thornburg Income Builder Opportunities Trust, and just recently became a board member of the Mutual Fund Directors Forum. Sue Matteson-King is a member of the board of directors for Davion Healthcare PLC, and also a board member for Touchstone Funds. And Ann Kritzmeyer is an independent director for Thornburg Income Builder Opportunities Trust. Today, we will equip you with the essential insights and practical tips for navigating and mastering the board interview process with confidence, I might add. And we are hoping today's discussion will be interactive. So if you have a comment or a question, please enter it in the chat box on the bottom right-hand corner of your screen. We will try to address those questions throughout the program and promise to follow up on any questions that we don't get to and or include those in the FAQ that we've been building around this series. So with that, let's get started. Ladies, thank you again for joining us in this third part of our Coffee Chat series on securing a board seat. The first thing I would like to start with is just general guidance on the interview process, how this might be different from other job interviews, what types of questions might be asked, and what are the most difficult or interesting questions. Dina, I know you have done a lot of work in finding your board positions and helping many others to do the same. So perhaps you could start and give us an overview.
Sure, and thank you, Cassandra, not only for this panel, but for being such a great host and sponsor over the course of the three. People seem to be very interested in the board journey and how to get there, and I'm joined by several women who have been very successful on that journey. I laugh because Cassandra said, oh, interview with confidence, and while I have succeeded in getting the board spots, I have also interviewed and not received the board spots. So I do have some lessons learned there. And I'm not sure you ever feel very confident going in. I always feel sort of that butterfly. And what we're here to do is give some practical tips, share what we've heard at the interview table, share some of our lessons learned, and hopefully your audience will transition. I think most of the audience have been steeped in the fund industry for years, and they're sort of bridging that to the next part of their journey. So when you think about the board interview, I think most people have heard it's not a typical interview. It's not like a job interview where you're sitting one-on-one and sort of defending your resume and answering the questions asked and so forth. And I asked Sue and Ann to jump in, but it's much more about a conversation and feeling as if there's a cultural fit, a dynamic, because you will be sitting around the board table with your peers 4 hours at a time, sometimes days at a time, and you really want to establish trust and respect, have a sense of humor, be engaging, communicate well, listen very well. And so I think the interview process, at least from my perspective, is very much about, are you a good fit around their table? And I'll pause there and see if Sue and Ann want to share anything kind of with that perspective.
I think it's partly, are you a cultural fit? And it's also, are you an intellectual fit too? But it's to your point, it's that ease of conversation. Do you build on each other, and do you feel like, oh, okay, this is somebody with whom I can partner and also somebody who I can challenge to grow and challenges me to grow.
Well said. Sue?
And I would agree that also respecting your fellow board members is a key factor in building trust. And a lot of the work of a board relies on the trust and trust but verify of information that you're presented with and leveraging your experience to make the best decisions possible on behalf of shareholders.
I think those are great points. And kind of building on one of Anne's points, I heard an author, so it wasn't my quote, but I heard an author say, the objective is not to be the smartest person in the room, but to make the room smarter. And I just think that sort of sums up what we're saying.
I love that.
So as you're preparing for, sitting down with these folks, and the interviews can be different. Certainly during COVID, you may end up on Zoom interviews, or your first round may be a Zoom interview. It may be a Zoom one-on-one, or it may be a Zoom panel. Most likely you will evolve into some sort of in-person interview, whether again, it's one-on-one or small groups, kind of corresponding to their in-person board meeting. You may also meet with management. I think it varies. But I think the first part of it is really to know yourself, refresh yourself on your board bio, refresh yourself on your skills and your experiences. But I think it's also, what are you adding to this board table? So to some extent, you're going to need to know what this board is looking for. And then you help connect the dots as to what you're bringing to the table. So as you're having the conversation, it's sort of that yes and. I'm listening to you. I'm hearing what you're saying about what you need. And here's how I can augment what you are, amplify, supplement. Here's what I'm bringing, especially in a diverse setting where your skill sets are additive to what's already on the table. So again, I'll pause. I see heads nodding. Any other kind of thoughts on knowing yourself and sort of being grounded in what your elevator speech might be? I tend to think, and Anne, I see you sort of nodding. I tend to think about, can you focus on maybe 3 things that you're bringing to the table? Because everyone's, 25, 30 years of experience, and there's a lot there. But what are your themes that you're focusing on for this board discussion?
And I think that's really important, as we've talked about in the prior coffee chats, right? When there's a board vacancy, certainly the board has done some work around, what's the skill set that they either need to replace, or what kind of gaps might they have? And so it really is a matter of lining up not only cultural fit or interest, skill sets. What are they looking to fill in that vacancy, quite frankly? And to that point, I think it's also important to consider whether or not this board is a good fit for you. So, not only through any diligence you might have prior to the interview, but during the interview process, you are also vetting this board. Sue, maybe you could give us your top considerations that you think about going into the interview.
Terrific. Thank you, Cassandra, and thank you for having me on this panel with Dina and Anne. It's my pleasure. There are so many things to consider, and as Dina said, know yourself. Another thing you should do is make sure you understand the role description that's presented for the particular board seat. Some boards may prioritize acumen in accounting or audit. Others may seek someone who has been a former portfolio manager. And sometimes it may not be a top line item in the job description, but you can tease out what is the skill that this board might be seeking. They may be seeking these diversity measures in terms of experience, and they may be seeking diversity in terms of your past professional experience. Did you work at a large firm that had multiple asset classes? Did you work at a firm that had a particular expertise in alternatives? So when you see that job description, make sure that you know what it is that they're looking for and that you sincerely believe you could be a good fit, and be prepared to explain why you're a good fit. You may also want to think about how to express your interest in the industry. And several recommendations that I've learned from friends and successful board directors is participate in industry conferences. Many of the trade organizations, law firms, and accounting firms offer free seminars and webinars, or for very modest costs. And very knowledgeable speakers will talk about new and emerging trends or securities or litigation. And if you are participating in learning about the industry and staying current with the industry, that gives you more depth for your conversation, and you can actually think about new questions that you might not have asked if you hadn't joined some of these educational or information sessions.
I think, Sue, that's a great point. One of the questions I've heard around the interview table is, where do you see the industry going, right? You know, particularly the mutual fund industry, where do you see that going? Where do you see ETFs? You know, so staying on top of those hot topics, especially if you're somebody who has retired, you know, you want to prove that you're still in the game there. And we can talk a little bit about this later about, you know, when do you start? Is there an issue if you're fully employed? Is there an issue if you're retired? But I think demonstrating that even if you're retired, you're still as quick and as relevant as ever, I think is a great point.
I would agree. I know that at least one of the boards that I interviewed for, they were looking for, they kind of mentioned a particular experience, which I had some of, but some of the conferences I have attended added more depth to that as well, because of course, my experience may have been at one or two companies, and those conferences give you a wider range of information, as well as the opportunity to then kind of bat it back and forth with other people.
Absolutely. And I think another consideration is not only the fund complex, and in the case of the Touchstone funds and many other investment management company boards, the use of multiple sub-advisors is something to consider. It is are the portfolios managed by one organization or by multiple? And so figuring out, there's a very different approach to serving as a director on a complex that has multiple sub-advisors and multiple service providers versus one that's more streamlined. And so, in fact, if you are on a board that has multiple sub-advisors, multiple service providers, you may not be able to serve on any other mutual fund boards. There may be some conflicts of interest. So that may be a good probing area of conversation, what the policies are or what the sentiment is about serving on more than one board. And plenty of directors serve on multiple fund complex boards, and others are limited to one. So you may want to understand what those requirements are.
So I would just jump in for this audience. For those of you interested in the series trust arena, it kind of amplifies what Sue is saying. Not only are there multiple advisors, unaffiliated advisors, but the sponsor tends to be a fund administrator. And so understanding the dynamics as you're going in, that the series trust interview is slightly different because the fund administrator is playing such an important role around that table.
Also layer onto that with the series trust, when you start thinking about cultural fit for you, with the series trust, because there are so many overall advisors, then you've got a lot of personalities in some ways. You've got the administrator, to your point, a very heavy, but then it's the opportunity or the challenge, depending on your view, of circling through a lot of different kinds of personalities and approaches to managing investments.
Yep.
Absolutely. All of those are very important considerations. And to your point around whether it's a standalone trust or a series trust, I mean, some of that builds into the amount of work that's going to be involved and the size of the board book with all of the materials that you'll need to review prior to the meeting. Typically in a series trust, there are many more funds than there are in standalone funds. And so because of that, I know my experience has been with some of our clients when they're seeking new candidates and we're in the interview process, making sure that the candidates understand, just what a time commitment they're getting into, what the opportunity costs are around, to your point, whether or not you can serve on multiple boards. Once again, because I think every board is, also wants to make sure the candidate is a good fit for them and that they're a good fit for the candidate, because it is expensive to, it can be expensive to replace board members. There's rules around how many need to have been approved by the shareholders. So, timeline, cost. What no one wants to do is bring someone on board and, come to find out shortly thereafter that it's not what they had bargained for.
Sure, absolutely. And I think you talked about just going to conferences and education, that viewpoint on what's the existing board's view on education. I know I've encountered some that are much more just no nonsense, and that's a personality, absolutely. And then others that are sponges for wanting to continue to be educated. And there's a balance there.
And that's definitely a growing trend where boards are working in an educational component to the meetings. I know on my board, we have covered topics such as the rise of AI and ChatGPT and how that might impact client information, access to product information, and so forth. We've looked at cyber risk, regulatory changes under the most recent administration. There are so many topics that are relevant. It's very helpful for boards to all be on the same page, hear each other's questions, and learn from each other and subject matter experts to be able to stay on top of impactful changes.
Absolutely. So maybe I think it's time to get into some detailed suggestions about how to actually prep for the interview. Anne, would you like to lead us off?
Sure. Through my whole career, I've always been known for saying, well, what does success look like? So I think that's the beginning is, to Dina and Sue's earlier points, do you know already what is that board seeking? Have they identified specific skill sets or experiences or demographics, skills, technology, and cyber? Some boards that are larger are getting more specialized. So they want a well-rounded board of specific experiences and skills. Are they looking for an audit committee financial expert or someone who will serve on the audit committee? Are they looking for someone with that investment background? Are they looking for someone with distribution background? It used to be a lot of investment and attorneys, and now I think we're seeing more diversity on those skills and experiences, or compliance and legal. There's nothing, absolutely, that still continues to be needed. The experiences, are they looking for experiences in, to Sue's point, alternatives, or we see a big wave towards ETFs, whether it's new or even conversions? And then the demographics. Are they looking for somebody to fill some things because they want a more diverse board? Is geography a consideration? Are you currently working? Are they looking for someone who can serve for a longer time, and therefore age is going to be something that they consider? So I think the first one is to look at what does success look like, and how do you layer up in that, and being honest.
And I would just jump in on that age question because I know it comes up a lot. And
Please.
I started interviewing, and for this audience, it did not take me just a couple weeks to get on a board. It took me years. So I'm just just putting it out there that there's a timeline to this. But I started when I was younger, and I actually got some questions, and the boards can kind of tease it out, but they were concerned that there actually might be too long a runway for me. I was now committing to plus 25 years on their board because they had an age retirement as opposed to a 10-year retirement. And so just being aware of, you can't change your age, but being aware of how you address that dynamic, whether they're asking directly or kind of asking around the sides. Then there are some boards who are concerned that you may be a little bit older and you're not going to have a long enough timeline. So again, you can't change your age, but be prepared as to how you're going to respond to that. Same issues about capacity. If you're fully working, how do you address that that's a benefit to the board because you are still relevant and current and engaged in the industry, versus if you've retired, again, how are you personally investing in yourself so that you're investing in the board? But I could go on, but I'll let you go back.
Good points. Good points. I think, one of the things also, of course, you're going to do an information search, looking at that fund's or that sponsor's website. What's going on? Who do they serve? What else do they do besides the fund board or whatever it is that you are interviewing for? Do they have other investment vehicles? Do they have other retail products? Are they also a bank? What else is going on there? Again, it's not so that you could spit out a whole lot of information, but you're trying to create this background of information for you to then have themes you want to advance and be conversational. No, but the other thing I think is interesting on websites, and also you'll see this in their written materials, what are they proud of? It gives you a sense of their personality. Who are the key people? And then a little bit of the history. How did they get here? There are things that we've seen fund companies that merge together, like a Janus Henderson or something like that. We've seen a lot of movement and acquisitions. Calvary to someplace else now. Van Kampen went to someplace else, things like that. But what is that history, and what does that start making you think about where that board is?
And maybe what keeps them up at night, right?
Yeah, exactly.
It's a great question.
Yeah.
We actually had a question come in going back to the topic of age. So the question is, do you find that as women, you need to approach the interview differently? And then the follow-up was, what about the research of the opportunities? So maybe if we take the first part of that with respect, I mean, do you feel like age is treated differently in female versus male candidates? Have you had any thoughts or concerns around that?
I only have one experience where I was pursuing a board seat that I did not secure, but the comment was made that I was exactly the right age, that to Dina's point, I could serve for more than a decade and a half, but I wasn't going to be on for 3 decades. And they were looking for someone with 12 to 15 to 18 years of service runway, and they had an age limitation as well. So that's the only time there's been an overt comment to me about age. But I think the bigger concern I've heard is about retiring, that if you are still working, I think most boards are going to think you don't have the bandwidth, because most boards are required to meet in person, and you meet during the week. So that would mean if you're meeting 4 times a year, there are 8 days that you have to use as vacation to go serve on a board at a minimum. And that just is not tenable for most boards, especially if there's an ad hoc issue that comes up. You need to be available to give your 100% to that board.
That's a good point. And especially like a board like a BDC, there are sometimes decisions and very, very little lead time. And so they're going to need you to set something aside and respond with intelligence and thought within 24, 48 hours.
Yep. I
Right.
think some interval funds that have exemptive relief, I think there are some requirements that the board has to get together very quickly, whether it's on Zoom or not, but still you kind of have to clear your calendar. Another thing, and not to get too far away from the original question about women interviewing, but especially for this group where you've grown up in management, right? And most likely have dipped your toe into the C-suite. One of the questions that does come up is, how do you take that hat off and become a board member and no longer the person rolling up your sleeves and doing the work? And I think there is a pretty big concern. A lot of the boards recently do want somebody with industry experience. However, they don't want you to come in and fix everything. They don't want you to come in and rewrite the reports and take over the meetings. So I think modifying your response to show that you used to be in the trenches with management and now you're here to be an advisor and an overseer of management is really one of the dynamics that needs to come across in your responses.
Let me ask you a question on women, and I'm just thinking about this. It's my own ad hoc sample size, but in my experience on a variety of boards, fund boards, nonprofit boards, I serve as an elected official as well. The women generally do a better job or seem to be less.
Period. Oh, sorry.
No, yeah, there's that. They seem to be less inclined to dive in and take over. So better on the oversight, better on the noses in, hands out.
Mm-hmm.
That's just that may be a broad brush that's not fair at all to men, because I certainly don't mean that of all men, but I think just some of the ones I've seen, maybe it's more on my village board, but the men want to go in and fix.
And I think, we were talking about that cultural fit. When you're around a table, it's very much about collaboration, right? It's listening, it's coming up with thoughts, it's being respectful as other people are trying to add their thoughts in. I know there's some research that say, if you have 3 or more women on a board, the gender dynamics are additive, but you don't notice the gender as much because it's no longer, well, that's the female's perspective, or there are the 2 women on the board. When it's 3 or more, it just becomes a natural flow. I think, just to try and answer this question, sometimes a female's appearance may come across as looking young, and making sure that when you're at the table, you're demonstrating that you have the right to be there, that you have the experience and the skill set, regardless of everything else. And you're confident in what you're bringing to the table, no matter how you look or how your other experiences.
Mm-hmm. To circle back on the specifics for preparing, and I also see we have a question about serving on audit. No matter what, but especially if you think that you are going to be asking to be on the audit committee, or you're being asked to serve on the audit committee, you want to review their shareholder reports and the SEC type filings, and diving in there. What is in there? What are the funds? 1 or more of the funds that you're going to oversee? What are they proud of in tone and personality, which is the non-financial part? And then the financial part, what is it they're investing in? What do you see that's maybe less than plain vanilla? And everything probably does have something that's less than plain vanilla, whether unusual investments, a lot of different valuation, which is something the board needs to concern itself with. Are there derivatives? What are the fees and how are those structured? So being very comfortable with the contents of those financial reports if you're going to be on the audit committee. Dina, you may have something to add on this, and Sue, please also. There are people who believe the audit committee must have CPAs. The SEC wrote it so that is not a requirement. There are a lot of people who have spent a lot of time analyzing, who have great depth of information and the ability to add value to an audit committee, but they didn't come from the CPA angle. They come from a deep analytical angle, or in my case, having to be the person who is investor relations and address deep analysts from our standpoint.
I've seen some audit. Oh, I'm sorry, Cassandra.
No, you go ahead, Sue. Thank
Oh,
you.
I was just going to add that many fund boards have former CFOs who have worked outside of the asset management industry. That's another category of expertise. But I know one of the questions that will often concern applicants is the chicken and the egg. Some boards want someone who has had board service, but how do you get your first board if you haven't had any service? So one tip is to look in your community and consider joining a not-for-profit board and determine, do you have the skill, the interest, the aptitude, and the desire to keep serving on boards? And that is a way to self-assess. And if you are a CPA or you've worked with deep analysis in financial information or data analytics, does your experience on perhaps a not-for-profit board make you think that you could actually leverage that when you're looking for an investment management board or an asset management board? So that can be another pathway if you're interested in audit. Try it out on maybe a community library board or a local museum board, and get some expertise that way to figure out if this might be a pathway forward.
I think, Sue, you're spot on. It is a chicken and the egg. The questions that I have been asked sort of as I'm sitting in the table before I joined a board was, why do you want to be on a board? Why now? So what has changed in your life that is triggering this? And why this board? So, think about your answers, and especially if you have not yet served on a board, connect the dots for the people around the table. What have you seen? What have your experiences been in a boardroom? I do think nonprofit is helpful. I have also heard that a lot of boards who are searching for candidates discount nonprofit service. So I'm just saying it, unless that nonprofit has a pretty significant national presence or a significant P&L and so forth. They say yes, but is there also a little more? Also, have you gone to your company and participated in their board meetings? Are you a natural presenter at their board meetings? Are you a fund secretary and taking the minutes? Are you actively involved in the boardroom? I think you can use some of those experiences to show how you would show up, that the questions that good board members should ask because you've been in the room. So even if you're networking or writing blogs, the easier it is for the listener to connect the dots because you've connected them what questions should a board ask about AI or ChatGPT? Let people know you already think like a board member, and your presence there, having sat in maybe the management seat and knowing what a good board should be asking, I think is helpful, even if you haven't been at the table in that role.
I agree. Go ahead.
On the CPA question, I just wanted to answer this for everyone. So you are not required. The audit committee must be made up of independent trustees. So they can't have any be related to or working for the fund sponsor, the distributor, the advisor, any sub-advisors. There's not a requirement that you be a CPA or CFA. There are also financial experts on some audit committees. Once again, the trust is not required to have a financial expert, but there is a financial expert questionnaire. It's not a requirement that you be a CPA or CFA, but typically those are the types of people who would qualify as financial experts.
Yeah, and each board or each audit committee of the independent people, the independent trustees are the ones who decide, right?
Yes. Mm-hmm. well, council usually guided by council, right?
Exactly.
So there's a questionnaire that's put out there. Once you become a board member, and prior to being a board member, you're going to fill out lots of questionnaires, because we are constantly reevaluating any sort of conflict situation, confirming that you are in fact an independent trustee if you're intended to be an independent trustee, which I think most of the people on the call, that's the slot that you would fill. So you will be asked going forward information on at least an annual basis.
Mm-hmm. I think back to the preparation too, I think we're doing a lot of circling back on who are you and what are you interested in, and understanding those themes and getting a sense of what is the board looking for, what are their priorities, what is their personality, and how do you connect the dots to make that easy in a conversation. Okay, so there's a lot going on there, but that's also, once you get there and expect the best, I think that's the other advice or other idea. Expect the best. I interviewed for one board that had a very highly decorated, well-known admiral, and I went in a little bit fearful. The man could not have been nicer. So there's a level of, on the confidence, expecting the best, but that those themes of what do you want, what are you about, what do you bring? I was also asked, what committees would you like to serve on? So back to the chicken and egg. If you haven't served on a board, then network, educate yourself, understand what those committees are going to be concerning themselves with.
And the SAI will have the funds SAI will have a description of, biographical information about not only the existing board members, but the committee structures as well. So when you're doing your research, that's an important document to review.
I would add on to Anne's points. You've got to be yourself. You come across however you come across, but be genuine and be yourself, because after the interview, you're going to be yourself at the board table, right? And so they want you for who you are. And you may decide that you aren't a great fit with these people for personality reasons or whatever the case may be, but be yourself and read the room. If you are talking and you are talking too much, which sometimes I am known to do, make sure you're watching the body language. Make sure that you're pausing and letting somebody else speak. If you feel like you're too scripted and they're trying to take the conversation somewhere else, be able to pivot.
Yeah. I think also you'll want to ask questions. So part of your prep is to ask yourself, all right, what do you do? What do you connect with? What are your interests? And what stands out in your preparation that makes you want to ask another question? Maybe it's in the history, maybe it's about the people, maybe it's about what you found they're proud of or concerned about. But that's A, it's showing the interest, and B, hopefully it's very genuine.
Absolutely. So I'd like to circle back around to lessons learned. Dina, you started off mentioning this, and we've put together a list, but maybe each of you could go through and mention a couple of lessons you've learned in the interview process that will be helpful for people who haven't been through it yet. Dina, would you like to start us off?
Sure.
I know you just gave us a few,
Yeah,
but if you
Well, and as I mentioned earlier, I may sit on a board today. It has been a roller coaster. There are interviews I've gone through and I thought, wow, that went really well. And then I got the call that I didn't get it. So it is a roller coaster ride. If you have a chance to ask for feedback after they've made their decision, I do encourage it. My old boss used to say, feedback is the breakfast of champions. It's a little bit tough to get the feedback, especially if you don't get it. But if there's a way to get that feedback, that's great. Again, one of the things I was sort of, some of the feedback I got, which was a little unusual, was you spoke, and it was a big panel. There were 10 people. I was on the one side of the, the end of the table, and there were 10 people lengthwise and video. And they said I would talk and I would pause, and nobody else spoke. So then I would kind of go back, and sometimes you talk to fill the silence. But the feedback I got was, well, you paused, but then you kept going. And you take that with a grain of salt. At some point, then you're just sitting in a quiet room thinking, gosh, nobody's asking me questions. But again, read the room, try and make eye contact. If you're going down a road that is not connecting, pivot as quickly and smoothly as you can.
I thought that's terrific, Dina. I think knowing how you have performed will help you perform better the next time. A lesson learned for me was I started my search at the very beginning of COVID, and I had no idea how to get traction, how to find out what openings were coming for boards. I was trying to network with people. And one of the things I did was I signed up for a number of paid organizations where they identify that they will have board positions made available and that you'll be considered. And I found I had no really substantial leads from any of those. And I felt like I wasted money for some of these services. And what really benefited me the most was networking with people who I knew in the industry, networking with former colleagues who had secured board posts, and in particular, talking with the service providers like Directors Council, the accounting firms that have asset management or mutual fund practices. Those people are actually trusted advisors of the boards in general, whether it's someone who's serving as an independent director, their counsel, or the lead accountant. They know what's coming down the pike and what they're going to be looking for. And talking to them will help you really narrow your search. And related to this is the concept of patience, that it took me more than 2 years to land my board seat. And that was considered relatively fast. That this is a very long ball game. It takes a lot of tilling of the soil and planting of the seeds. And also, it really depends on when a board is going to have a retirement or someone who needs to resign. So there may be some boards that will not have an opening for 5 or 10 years. So to start to pursue a particular position there is futile. You really want to do your research. Anne mentioned it very eloquently. There are lots of public resources where you can go digging and find out when are some directors going to be aging off. And does one of them have skills that are sort of similar to mine? And maybe I would be a really good replacement for that person, or come in with additional skills that perhaps the board doesn't have. So patience and perseverance were my lessons learned.
For you.
Excellent.
I've had I love to have conversations with people. I definitely had one where I thought there was a big pause. And so I asked a question, and then was that, well, wait, I'm not done asking my questions. And so, all right. So I could tell that that particular board member was not going to be a big fan of me for some reason. She was a professor at a very well-known university. So I think she was used to controlling the room, clearly sharp. Would love to keep her in my sphere very much. But that was a bit of a, I didn't read that well, and maybe I don't fit well. No, that's okay. That's absolutely okay. I would say one of the other things that I have learned is what we're doing here, and that opportunity of paying it forward, because not only does it feed my heart, but I think it's feeding the network and allowing me to share back, and then that will come back to both me and the people I help. So I think
absolutely. And just to add on to Anne's, as Sue was talking about the network, I feel that one of my strongest parts of my network were other board candidates. Yes, it's great to meet the people on the boards. The lawyers and the accounting firms and back office are fantastic, but you really build your army with other board candidates. Sue and I met at a conference and we shared a cab together, and here we are 4 years later. We both landed our boards and we're continuing to pay it forward. The helping each other along the way is just, it's a fabulous opportunity to move forward.
All right, we are right at time, 10:45. So that concludes our chat for today. And the Registered Fund Board Member Series. Actually, we've talked about maybe coming back with some follow-up. And for anyone who hasn't been on a prior call, we have been compiling an FAQ. So we will add some interview questions to that FAQ and update that and send it to the participants as well. I want to thank everyone who attended today's program, and particularly Dina, Sue, and Anne. Thank you for your valuable insights. When this webinar ends, everyone will be prompted to complete a survey. So if you would please do that, it helps us out in planning future coffee chats. So thank you again, and everyone have a wonderful day.
Great.
So much.
Thank you.
Thank
Honored
you.
to be here. Bye-bye.
Good luck, everyone.
Thank you. Bye-bye.